Hey everybody, PatBenage here, the evolution coach, creator of the 6-week shift in the inner path, and author of this inspirational blog, SoulTalk. And last week we talked about higher self and listening to that inner voice, that inner wisdom, and following it and allowing that to be the director of your life, identifying as that voice, becoming that voice. Today, what I want to talk about involves why we don't listen to that voice. What stops us? What is it that keeps us from listening and following that truth that's within us, that knowing that's within us? And we can all look back at times when we can clearly see that if we'd followed that voice, if we'd listened, that things would have turned out much better. Or we can look back at times when we have listened to that voice and everything has lined up and everything's worked out. And yet, still, we have difficulty doing it. We have trouble actually following through with what that inner voice is telling us. So why is that? So what I'm going to talk about is the absolute reason why we don't, and then how do we overcome that? How do we get beyond that problem? And then the number one, really, it's behind all reasons why we don't. It's fear. It's fear. It's fear of, well, what if it doesn't work out? What if it isn't the truth? What if I go down that path and it doesn't turn out the way that I want to? And so we look for the safer route. We look for what's more comfortable for us. We look for, that security and the known factor rather than attempting the unknown. Because oftentimes that little voice in our head is asking us to choose something that we don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't know what the result's going to be. We haven't attempted that before. We haven't tried that before. And so it's an unknown. And we have this underlying fear that voice might not be right. It might not get us what we want. And so we don't trust it. We don't trust it. We don't trust that inner voice. And we're afraid to try something different and new. We look out at the world and we see how things are sort of how they're done, how our culture does things, and we prefer to follow some predetermined path. We prefer to follow in somebody else's footsteps because there's a better chance, we think, of success. And that's totally the mind. But we do that out of fear that if I step outside of that, I might fall off a cliff. I might be a disaster. Just don't know. But, without risk, there's no reward. And so you have to be willing to step outside of that comfort zone in order to get what you really want and not settle for what's safer. what's more likely in your mind. And so to overcome that fear requires trust. You know, when you don't trust something, it's trusting that gets you over that. And my experience is that whenever someone is stuck in their life, whenever they're stuck in a rut, when they're having difficulty moving forward, it's always always a matter of trust or lack of trust. And it's always finding some way to trust, at least a little bit, that moves them forward. So if I can muster up some trust, some degree of trust, then I can step out of that rut. I can step out of that comfort zone and toward what I really want. And so how do we get that when we don't have it? If I don't have trust, how do I get trust? How do I get to that place? Well, as I mentioned before, we can all look back in our lives. We can look at our lives and we can say, you know, at this point in time, I got this, you know, inspiration or this little nudge from within, and I followed it, usually without really thinking. I followed that inspiration, and I avoided this problem, or I created something really cool. You know, so I followed that instinct, that intuition, and it worked out. You know, it worked out. Or I can look back at times when I got that nudge and I thought, you know, I ought to do this, and then I didn't do it, and then turns out if I had done it, if I'd followed that, you know, I would have had some great experience, or, you know, something. It would have brought me something that I, you know, maybe was unexpected, but would have been great. I would have loved it. But I didn't get that because I didn't follow that intuition. I didn't follow that inner voice. I didn't listen. I didn't trust it. And so to gain trust, to find that trust within yourself, number one, you have to become more conscious. You have to become more conscious of when that voice shows up. So you have to be listening, and you have to be paying attention. And then when you hear it, when you get that nudge, when you get that intuition, you know, if your mind goes, nope, that's, you know, you're just imagining it. You're just it's full of, you know what. And so your mind is wanting you to move into the safe zone and stay there. So when you're conscious, when you're awake, when you notice that, then you can look back again to these moments when you've either not listened and things didn't turn out, or you have listened and they did turn out, and say, I'm going to trust it. I'm going to trust it. I'm going to follow that voice. I'm going to follow that inspiration, that insight, that intuition, and start moving in that direction. And sometimes you have to start with little things, and that's okay. You know, just start where you can. And as you do that over time, you're going to have more of those instances that you can look back on and say, I followed it, and by God, it turned out pretty good. What you're going to find then is then you do begin to trust it. And with trust comes courage. And courage is really the thing that overcomes all the fears. But you have to have that little bit of trust, at least a little bit of trust, in order to have the courage to step forward. And courage is not, like I say, I've heard it 100 times or more, that courage is not the absence of fear. And courage is the willingness to step forward even in the face of fear. And I think that, sometimes you think of courage as kind of a blind courage, just stepping into it in the face of whatever without any thought. That might not be the best idea sometimes. That might really put you in danger. That could be foolhardy. So you don't want to do that. But if you've got that inner voice that's telling you, maybe you ought to move in this direction. This is feeling like, something really great could come of this. Then courage in that instance will take you to unlimited heights. And so, again, today we're kind of going over that, listening to that voice, that higher self, that inner wisdom that we have, and how do we do that? And the way to do that is to trust it. Is to trust it. That's how you overcome that fear that things won't work out, that it's not true, that voice isn't real, it isn't true, it's my imagination, it's wishful thinking, or whatever. Be willing, be conscious, and notice and listen to the voice, but then be willing to step into that. Trust it enough and have the courage to step forward. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes. The more you trust, the more you will find that it'll be natural. It'll become the natural choice for you to simply listen and act and choose. And that's once you reach that point, then you're really on your way to living your truth. And the more you listen, the more you act, the louder that voice becomes. And as I mentioned before, the vision, the range, the expansion of that, what that voice is telling you, will grow exponentially. So I hope this is beneficial, inspirational for you. And as always, thank you for showing up. Thank you for being here and helping me to express my truth. Because you being there it brings it out of me. I trust that. I know that. We are connected. So remember, always live life from the inside out. See you next week.